Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome here to UNSW. This is part of our Diversity Festival, which is the 5th time we've run it in a row. Today we're going to look at our journey in Auslan. My name is Alastair McEwin. I'm a Professor of Practice in Disability here at the University of New South Wales. And I work with a large team who very deliberately have included people with disability to be our practice professionals. Today is a really exciting day. It's an opportunity for us to recognise Auslan here in the community, but in the wider of Australia and how it is used. So deaf people use language in many different ways, signed and spoken. We will have an acknowledgement of country after I have introduced our fantastic panel. So I might pass over for everyone to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Al, Yamakara, and welcome. Young and old women, I'm Rodney Adams. I'm an Aboriginal academic working with the Centre for Disability Research in Policy at Sydney University. And my focus is on teaching intersectionality between Aboriginal and deafness and spreading that into the mainstream media. We focus on different subject areas. I'm also a teacher of the deaf, and I've been working for many, many years. My specific research area is Aboriginal language, and I hope to share more of that with you a little bit later on.
Hello, my name is Dion. This is my sign name. I wear many different hats, but mostly I'm also an educational designer where I teach Auslan as well. And in my side job is I work as a recognised deaf interpreter, so I do wear many hats. I've been part of the deaf community all of my life. Signing in Auslan was my first language, my first preference in language. I am a motorbike rider. I love doing that. I do play and enjoy different games. Part of my language growing up was part of my journey is being interested in so many different aspects in my life. I was also able to have the support of my mum, who really believed that having language and access to Auslan was really important.
Hi, my name's Angie Goto, and that's how you say my name. I'm an artist, a painter in fact. I'm an art educator. I work in numerous art galleries, the MCA, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and our house, the beautiful Opera House, and many other places where I led and held exhibitions. I love art. I think art is a beautiful way to teach and educate. Deaf people and art go together. It's a visual means to express yourself where you don't need language of any kind. I advocate for more access in the area of arts and the arts world because it is vital. There are so many barriers that we encounter in the arts world. So that is a big goal of mine, to create more inclusion and accessibility. When I am in this space, I am always at my happiest. Now, I grew up using my voice to speak. A term that we use for that is oral. I came to become familiar with the signing world as an adult, and I've slowly moved to spend more and more time and develop my identity as a deaf woman. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you. Thank you all. Rodney, Dion and Ange, that's wonderful. I'm going to ask Rodney to do an acknowledgement of country now, if you would. Thank you.
Yamakara and welcome, young and old women. young and old men, to the nation of the Bidjigal people, the plain dwellers. I want to acknowledge the Bidjigal people who had a strong warrior, or who fought for people that were deaf. I want to especially acknowledge Pemulwuy. I acknowledge the history of Aboriginal people. A strong warrior who fought for the land against colonialism in this area. Today we celebrate the International Day of Sign Languages and the many different cultures of this land, and the importance to First Nations deaf people and all of the sign languages that we have. In Australia, we have over 20 Indigenous sign language that represents the true diversity of this content and inclusiveness. So today, let's acknowledge the many sign languages of this beautiful ancient continent, expressing all forms of sign languages of the First Nations people, and let's expand and encourage this, because the past is really, really rich with language, especially sign language. So this is a great opportunity to celebrate today.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the University of New South Wales, I want to acknowledge that we are here on beautiful Aboriginal land, and it always was. Now, for those who are watching online, captioning is available. Please take use of that. If needed, we have IT support, so let us know if there are any problems. If you have questions, we're using Slido today. And so for those online, you can access the Q&A option via Slido. I am so interested to find out more about each of our panellists' journey in Auslan. Commonly, deaf people are born to people who can hear. Many times, the parents are going through a lot of anxiety and grief and fear about what that means when they're told their tiny little baby is deaf. And this is not just unique to Australia. Internationally, around the world, this is a common experience. So, Ange, I wanted to start with you if I could. Can you tell us, how did your family manage and cope? And what was their reaction when they were told little baby Angela couldn't hear? And tell us a little bit about the journey your family took. My parents were shocked. They were heartbroken. They were worried. But at that time, the medical model was very strong. The doctors told them, give her a good education, teach her how to speak, and she will be okay. And Mum said, no signing? Shouldn't she learn sign language? And the doctors said, no, that's not the right way to go. So, I'm sure it was difficult for them. I did go to a deaf school when I first started school, but I don't know that it was even English. I think it was
signed English.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dion. It was signed English. But predominantly my education was focused on spoken language. I was taught to lip read, to follow spoken language, and then I remember running out in the playground and we would hide and use our hands to talk to each other, but we would try very hard never to get caught. Mum took me out of that school and put me into a mainstream school where everyone could hear. And I have to say, that was hard. It was quite awful, and I probably still have a little bit of trauma from that experience. Being overwhelmed with all of the things that are normal in a world that can hear. And my parents didn't know. It wasn't deliberate, but they didn't know any better. They followed the medical advice. And at the time, that was the dominant advice that was around. Thanks, Ange. When, Dion, when you introduced yourself, you said that your mum knew sign language. Now, how did that influence your childhood? How was that important to you growing up?
Well, I'll give you the shortened version, if you will. So when I was born, my mother originally didn't know that I was deaf. It wasn't until my grandparents started to realise I wasn't responding when they were calling my name. And they started being a little bit suspicious. And they told my mum they were a little bit worried. At first, mum was very reluctant to listen to that. But they did eventually take me to the doctor, and it was confirmed after some tests that, yes, I was deaf. My mum was originally quite shocked. I didn't know. I was quite a happy little baby, still living my life. And then later on, my mother did go to different speech therapists, audiologists, trying to work out what was the best way to communicate with me using hearing aids. A lot of those, unfortunately, didn't work. They did try to give me toys to try to help me to respond, to speak, but it didn't work. I was just quite happy playing with them without responding. So I did get to a point where my mother just had a look in the yellow pages, and she saw that there was a deaf school was listed in there, FARA, which was based on signed English. But she saw that as a last resort. She thought, why don't I go and talk with the school and with my grandparents, her parents, and so they decided to sign. So a spoken word often common for a child is to say mum, but then the sign to do sign mum. So I was able to see that, but unfortunately because I couldn't speak, they were thinking that that would not help me to progress. But getting access to language, my mum realised it would really help me to really thrive. So my mum decided that it would be important for me to be able to speak and sign at the same time.
Wow. Rodney, what about you? How did your parents respond when they found out you were deaf?
I think looking back, the most important thing was my parents saw me as normal, right? Whatever that means. They just saw me, I guess, they tried to raise me the same way anyone else would. I had brothers and sisters. I was the fourth that had come along, so it seemed pretty normal. They found out I was deaf when I was 2. I had meningitis. So before that, I had a little bit of language development. After that, when we realised that I was deaf, it was a bit of reading. I went to school. I went to a mainstream school with some literate support. So it was helpful in some ways to develop my language. In other ways, it wasn't helpful, because when you get to school, it's a big deal. I was the only deaf person. So it wasn't until really that I'd left school when I properly learnt Auslan. It's a pretty common experience among the deaf community. My mum came along and we did a signed English course, and we tried to sort of keep up, but it was difficult. You love your mum regardless, right? I never feel guilty, or she always tried her best. It was a bit like a merry-go-round, right? Sort of, you do speech therapy, some audiology, the medical model. My journey just sort of kept going around and around. So looking back, I always think about the positive things that happened. I think my mum really cared and learnt to sign, and she really helped to accept me and my identity. So that's been a really big support for me.
So very interesting. Thank you so much. And a common theme that we hear are parents try their best. They listen to the advice from professionals, and for a long time the medical professionals had a very strong opinion on the best way for a deaf child to communicate. Let me give you an abbreviated version of my story. I was diagnosed as deaf at 2 because my language hadn't developed the same way that children my age was developing. Now, much later, Mum told me she would be vacuuming and I would be laying in the bassinet, sound asleep, and she always said, I have the perfect baby. Later, she realised, oh, I couldn't hear the vacuum. That's why I didn't wake up. You know, lots of therapy, speech therapy, and, you know, much the same of what many have experienced before I came to be part of the deaf community. Can I ask you, what was the biggest challenge? You know, whether it was a positive or a challenging outcome, what was the biggest challenge through your childhood family experience? Dion, can you comment?
Well, I encountered many challenges throughout my childhood. One of the big challenges was, of course, language and being able to communicate. Because my mum's first language was English and spoken language, I don't know about you other ones, but when I was born, I was sort of like a little bit between two worlds. I had the hearing world and the deaf world. I didn't really get access language until I was around 3. So my mum was trying to find ways to be able to communicate with me. So she found sign language, which was an amazing breakthrough for us. And it was a real positive thing for my mum to finally realise that she can communicate with me in sign language and also in spoken English in a way. And I was able to catch up the time that I'd lost when I was young. So I was able to understand concepts. I couldn't actually fully understand concepts, though, until I was around 14 when I really became fluent with Auslan. And then, because signed English follows one sign for each individual word. So if you have one word is equivalent to one sign. But here in Auslan, we have different signs for different concepts. For example, the word light, it means different things in English, but in Auslan, we have a sign for light, as in it's not heavy, or it's light, the light is turned on, so we can differentiate with that. So I could use the sign where in signed English, you'd use the same sign for turning the light on for the bag is light. So I was very confused. I didn't make those kind of conceptual connections until I really was able to access Auslan. So that was one of the barriers for me.
And you were saying before that you were born hearing and you lost your hearing. Do you think, Rodney, the access to spoken language had an impact on your language development?
I think with language, I mean, I love language today, but back at the time when I was 2, even before 2, starting to develop my language, after that, communication became a little bit more challenging. Of course, I had bits of language, but to properly communicate and lip read and follow conversation, it really impacted me on my development later on. I tried to make sure I could follow the linguistics, but it's a real struggle, and it was a real struggle to understand other concepts. Things about identity, because I couldn't properly communicate to be a part of the right community or feel where I could belong and be connected. So, obviously there was barriers. I feel like it really impacted me when I look back on my social and emotional well-being. I had a bad temper. Other hearing students might have picked on me or, noticed I was deaf and make fun of my speech. Obviously it made me upset. I'd respond in a very negative way. Because at the time I didn't know how to cope with who I was. My identity wasn't very clear. So it impacted my relationship with others. It impacted my relationship with teachers and the school, and it affected my parents. They were called for meetings with the principal, your son's in trouble again. So at the time, it was a big influence on my identity process. I had to accept who I was as a deaf person.
Wow. I want to be very clear. I'm not a violent person, but I do remember in year 9 punching someone, and I've forgotten the name. Well, I won't share the name, but they bought a fake hearing aid, like they cut it out of some cardboard just to make fun of me. And it's the only time I've ever hit another human. Like I said, I'm not an advocate for violence, but the frustration is a real thing. And you were mainstreamed. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about how that felt, that frustration of being the only hearing person?
I'll speak because it's a bit more. This is actually quite a personal experience, quite triggering for me to talk about, and that's why I'm going to speak. I went to a deaf school, fell in love with it. I had my sense of identity with the deaf kids, so I felt like I was just one of them. And then my mum took me out without telling me and took me to a hearing school, and I didn't know. I just thought I was going to a new deaf school with my other deaf friends. And when I arrived, it was just hearing. That really just, I'll never forget, it was just really traumatic. There were a few friends who were very, very lovely. They were very patient with me and they were really kind to me, but they were always the ones that were bullying. So I was really bullied a lot. And there were times when I used to come home from school and go into my mum's bedroom, and I've told her quite a few people about it lately because I've always hidden it, but now I need to get it out in the open. But I used to go to my mum's bedroom and there was a mirror and I was sighing to myself because I was so alone. I had nobody to sign to. And all I wanted to do was be with my deaf friend, and that was my way of entertaining myself. And then my sister will come in and start teasing me about me signing. So it was a really like a difficult journey, but I had to be forced to be a hearing, like think like a hearing person, talk like a hearing person, and it was okay for a while, but like for the last about 30 onwards, I just started to get really tired and I was really confused. I felt very empty. I didn't know who I was. I didn't feel authentic until I got back into the deaf community. I thought, oh, that's where I should be. That's who I am. That's my identity. That's where they can get me and understand what I'm going through. Because I tried to explain that to hearing people, but they just don't get it because they're not living with the deaf experience. But now I'm okay, I'm good. I'm really lucky and proud that I'm deaf and being involved in the deaf community. Love it, yeah. That's why it's so important to have bilingual for me. We'll talk about that a little bit later, yeah.
We're very, very happy that you're a part of the panel today, Ange. That's great. We might just pause for a moment about the education, upbringing side of things. I'd like you to tell me when you first found Auslan. How did you work your journey through finding Auslan? Like I said before, I guess I found Auslan properly when I was 18. I know that many people, it's the common experience, right? When you're around 18, you leave school, find the deaf community. I think things are changing slowly because they're introducing Auslan into the curriculum at schools. But I know for most deaf students, I work with them now, that the introduction to Auslan is a little bit delayed comparatively to English. We talk about the elephant in the room. It's language deprivation syndrome. We see it a lot, right? The issue with language deprivation syndrome is that we're still teaching the old way. We're still teaching deaf children to focus on non-verbal therapy, speaking and listening, and it's impacting a lot of the deaf and hard of hearing children that are already language deprived. For me, I think if I was exposed to Auslan when I was a little bit younger, my sense of identity would have been more advanced, would have been more developed. I would have been able to be me sooner and ready to take on the world. From 18 onwards, I still struggled with who I was as a person. I felt less than. But when I became involved and developed language, I built my confidence and excelled. Things started to get better from there.
And such a common response, a common thing that many, many deaf people talk about. And I love the story of you talking to yourself in the mirror, and just to see another deaf person. And
Yeah.
school was where you first were exposed to Auslan?
Yeah, and I had deaf friends, and some were, the other friends were visual, and I'd try to keep up with them and to understand what they were saying. My mum said that she didn't want me to be visual or to visit with deaf. She said if I did start signing and be with the deaf people, then my speech would be delayed and I wouldn't be able to learn English and I wouldn't be able to practice my listening and my lip reading skills that they wanted me to develop. But now I realise that I was deprived of language. I didn't realise it at the time. For example, just last night, I was working at the Powerhouse Museum and I was with a team of people that could all hear, and I didn't have an interpreter with me, and they were all speaking quite fast and they were all taking turns randomly as they normally would in a group. So for me to try to focus on people's lips and to be able to read them, I'm not sure who's speaking next, where's that bit of sound coming from, I was so disadvantaged. I was so confused I could not keep up with the conversation. I had to eventually just interrupt everyone and say, I'm sorry, can we just talk one-on-one? If you want to talk with me, let's just talk separately, just with each other somewhere else away from the bigger group, or we can all just take it in turns, because I have to be able to see who's speaking to be able to read their lips. It's just so difficult. So you can see how I'm still impacted by that to this day.
And so now you have the confidence to say, hey, hang on, can we change this? But at 12 or 14, you didn't have that kind of confidence.
Yeah, I was too shy. I did not feel empowered enough to be able to do that. I would hide. I would just be too scared of the situation. And I didn't want to look like the weird one either, and I just felt internally, it wasn't right, and I ended up just being very isolated at home and just looking after my children, and I felt my confidence was so low. I just I needed to go to a counsellor to get some help, and then I was told that I really needed to find my deaf identity, and only by finding that I was finally able to thrive and grow. And then that's when I was able to come and meet you, Dion, at TAFE, and you taught me Auslan, and since then it's been no looking back.
Wow, what a story. Dion, can I ask, Mum went to learn sign English, and she tried to teach you. By the time you were 14, you were well advanced from Mum, and you had that big aha moment with your Auslan.
It's actually before I was 14 when my mum was learning signed English, and we went out with a family group and they had some deaf children. We were at a picnic, and I remember one of the deaf individuals there, that mum was quite good friends with my mum, and I'd seen this person before and I'd seen them sign a little bit, and I remember looking at them and understanding what they were signing. I didn't know that it was Auslan at that time. Maybe I was around 8 or 9 years old. It wasn't until later on, and and I went to high school when I was 14, and that was at Chatswood High School. And at that time in year 8 was the first time that they'd brought in an Auslan interpreter. And I went, oh, okay, Auslan, and started signing. And I was just mind blown at this point, looking at this person signing. I'm going, what is happening? This person is signing and I am understanding. I could start asking questions where previously with signed English, I would, if they had interpreters, I would just sit there inert, just watching them, and it wouldn't spark any thought or questions or desire to comment in class. But now with this Auslan, I was getting concepts and understanding and starting to ask questions, and the teacher was even surprised and saw that how this had really opened up my eyes. So then afterwards after school, I changed school for many reasons. I went to 5 different schools over my time. Year 7 and 8, I went to a deaf unit and it ended up closing down, and I moved to North Rocks School. So I'd already been used to an Auslan interpreter from year 7 and 8. So I was able to move into the deafblind school at North Rocks because I had that experience with Auslan already.
Wow. For me, the first time I saw Auslan or sign language, I was 4. I went to what they called an oral unit, so a unit for children who were using spoken language. And I grew up in Adelaide. In the break, the kids would start signing, and not in the classroom, but in the breaks, and I was fascinated. We used to have South Australian Deaf School Sports Day. It was my favourite day of the year. All these deaf kids in one spot. And I saw kids that could talk to each other with their hands. And I remember from a young age going, I don't know what they're doing, but I love it. And some of the people that I met at those camps, I'm still friends with now. It's that, that intuitive response that you have to a language that you can completely access. When I use Auslan, I am relaxed, and like many of you, I move between the deaf and the hearing world, but there is a world where I don't have to try as hard. When I'm with my deaf friends, it's just easy. I am still catching up on TV shows from the 80s, the 1980s and 90s that I missed, that everyone loved, because there was no captioning. And so now I'm really enjoying Friends and all the other shows.
Yeah.
And I suppose what you're talking about is that deafhood.
That's so funny. I remember here in Australia, we didn't have captions until so late. I went overseas and I went to London in the UK, and I just couldn't believe it that they had access to captioning. And it wasn't just one TV show, there was so many, and movies. I was just stuck on the lounge watching TV. I didn't go out and tour around London or look at all of the landmarks. I just stayed in the motel reading all the captions because I was just so engrossed in being able to get access to TV shows. Dion, also before, I remember when I was younger, I used to watch some of the old 90s shows and TV, like Indiana Jones movie or Mary Poppins, with her with the umbrella. That time they didn't have captions, so I would just try to imagine, what are they saying? And I'd make up all these conversations that they were having. And then later on, when they did become captions, I'd go, is that all they're saying? Oh, really? Is that what they said? It wasn't anything like what I had imagined it to be.
Rodney, can you share some more about that?
Yeah, I remember me at home, the shops were 10 kilometres away. We tend to go to this chemist that was about 10 k's away, full of captioned videos. I don't know why there was captioned videos in there, but every week I'd ride my bike, I'd get my backpack on, and I'd get my way over there, load up my backpack, zip it closed. It looked like I was
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I was filling it up so much, I'd hop right back on my bike, and I'd just spend hours and hours watching TV, trying to catch up on movies with captions. That was the language I was craving, right?
Yeah. A repeated theme is access, right? You can hear it in all of our stories, and it's such a simple thing to establish, but such a struggle when it's not there. The access to an old movie like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, my goodness, for many deaf people, the struggle is ongoing, and that's something that we need to stay aware of. I want to talk about intersectionality. And I don't know if if any of you are open to talking about your own intersectional journey, how you created your individual identity.
I think for me, it's an interesting one because I feel like my life has sort of come in different decades. I've had many a journey. I've grown up with hearing family that didn't sign and communication was a real issue. Then I found the deaf world, became involved with the deaf world and developed my identity through that time in my life. And then maybe the third phase of my life, I really found my Aboriginal identity as well. So, it's been a long journey through my father's side. My grandmother really lives quite close to here in Redfern. It made me do a bit of research. I was so keen to get interested and researched on it. So that journey feels like it's been a big one, lots of turns and twists. Lots of transitions moving around for me. But learning about that now with my research in my professional career, I'm so excited by Aboriginal languages. Really, Australia is so rich with sign and gesture and visual communication. It's just incredible. So really, looking into Aboriginal Sign Languages, there's so much contribution to the deaf community too. When we talk about Australian English, we've got 400 different Australian words that we use every day for common topics. In Auslan, there's so little knowledge out there. So it's so good to get researching in that area and build on what we already know and develop that. Using different sign languages from some of the eldest parts of the world so that we can develop what we know. I'm really enjoying this phase of my life right now, finding my deaf identity and my Aboriginal identity. It's really exciting.
And I wish you all the best, Rodney. And what's been your intersectional journey with your deaf identity, with your heritage, your genetic heritage?
Well, my family still don't accept me as an Auslan user, and that's okay. I focus on me. I focus on my life and my journey. I'm happy now where I'm at. I do try to teach my children Auslan, but my grandson, I've been teaching him because he's still so young, so I try to get into him while he's so small. But also, I'm still learning. I'm still learning Auslan. I'm still learning about deaf culture because it is still quite new to me. Because I was part of the hearing world for so long and most of my informative years, I really feel like I was so trapped and finally trying to get free from that world. And it's just now that I'm on this journey and I'm using my art and my artistry and I'm inviting so many deaf people into my art world. And just recently I had an event it's a visual vital signs called Vital Signs. And that was an event that we had where fluent deaf users would perform and they would paint and they could be fully immersed and using their deafness as a space and everything was, it was hard work to run this event, but I believe it was such a success. So many people, deaf people attended, and they all said, please run this again. It was a free, very rare, they were saying how that they can just be involved so easily. So we did painting. So usually, if a person who can hear would arrive at an exhibition, for example, and there would be music playing, and they're listening and looking at the art at the same time, and they find a connection. But for us who are deaf, we don't have that connection with listening to music. So I think about the artwork and the paint, but the music aspect of it is my heartbeat. And how I can put like a little speaker behind to make a beat, and you can touch the artwork and you can feel the beat. And it's my painting that I have, which is about signing. And it's so interesting. A lot of deaf people that came along, they loved it, being able to touch the art and feel it, and the beats that were coming from that and the vibrations. So that was a way to improve their experience. So I invited Alex and Martha and Todd Wright and Jeremy and so many fluent deaf people that they were able to come and perform as well.
We need more of that, Ange, lots more.
That's my goal.
Dion, can you share some of the intersectionality experiences that you've had?
Sure. I have a lot of intersectionality within my identity. I am a non-binary and trans person myself. My pronouns are they, them. I do allow he, him for some people, but language is flexible for me. I'm not very strict in saying that this is my strict pronouns. I grew up primarily as a deaf person and having deaf identity. As I grew up and throughout my life, the second thing that intersectioned with me was being able to teach other people to understand my deaf identity. And some people were really keen and wanted to learn more, and I could sign with them and teach them my language. And I was able to teach other people to understand about giving me access to communication. You know, sometimes I might go to a shop and I would meet a person and just start signing to them, and not let people try to feel, oh, no, this person's deaf, what do I do? And I would say, it's okay, don't worry, I'm not a monster. I'm not going to bite. And just try to encourage people who are not familiar with the deaf community just to realise that we're humans, we're just the same. I'm a person just like everybody else, I just can't hear. So that's been throughout my life, my journey, and trying to figure out, a bit like you also, Rodney, about working out my identity and having these overlapping identities as I've gone through my journey, and I believe it's made me so much stronger. And I'm thinking about not being seen as bad, but really feeling empowered and taking our power back. So that's my intersectionality that I've lived through.
I've got just one or two more questions, but before we go on, I wanted to remind everyone here in the room and online to prepare your questions, share your questions with the Slido. I don't know if the Slido, if we've got a PowerPoint slide that explains how Slido will work. So for the people online, we have the Slido app that they're able to access. So please get your questions ready. Dion, advocacy is a big thing for you. And changing, the deafness as a deficit to a deaf gain. How have you managed that? That was a beautiful example that you talked about, is using your deaf power. What advice would you share with others, families in particular?
Sorry, yes, my advice for families in particular would be two things, is You could have a signing and speech and also using hearing aids and cochlear implants. But remember, they're only tools. They're only giving access to sound. It's not making you hearing. It's not hearing enough to be able to understand words. But with encouragement of learning to speak or lip read, plus with sign, it will also take that pressure off the child because there's so much for them to be able to learn. And the parents feel responsible as well. They feel like a double burden. And so sometimes they think they'll just meet in the middle and they want the child to fit their life. But I think the parents also need to give up as well and try to fit what the child needs. I really feel my mum was so willing to take on signing and to try to meet me halfway so that we could at least communicate with each other. And I really feel having that balance really worked. So that's my advice for the family. Try not just one form of communication, but multiple forms and really see what the child needs.
Yeah. So a cochlear does not make you the same as a person who can hear. A cochlear works differently in lots of different people, so we really need to understand what hearing assistance devices do. Rodney, if you could advise or advocate to young families, what would you say?
You know, it's easy to burn out advocating so hard for such a long period of time. So it's important to sometimes think about that. I think for me as a teacher of the deaf, we look at the curriculum, the ACARA, the Australian Curriculum Resource Association. They bring up a lot of terminologies and modality. When we talk about language, there's 270 times they use modality when they talk about the curriculum. So it shows how important it is to become much more diverse in the way that we present our information. Through the different ways we speak and hear and different kinds of language modalities through the way we are educated as deaf people. Modality is really important. It's important to apply that into how we work for the future of deaf children and their families as well. So we really need to encourage that there's not just one way, not monolingual. We've got to support the different avenues and make sure there's options. Some deaf children respond differently to one way and others to different ways. You know, it's important to encourage that there's all of the options and we need to keep trying. We can't put all of our eggs in one basket, right? And just hope for the best and assume that that will be the way that the deaf child will develop. So we've got to make sure that we've got these avenues for deaf children. They might better off, you know, one way more than the other.
And I would add, letting parents learn to, you know, like it's a tough gig for a parent, and they hit these barriers. And so we've got to support the parents too. I might change my question just slightly. And you spoke about your family not embracing your deaf identity. What would you say to families who feel a bit hesitant? You know, any new family who are scared of embracing the deaf community?
I would mirror what Dion has said. You know, try both avenues, signing or learning to speak, or trying getting a cochlear. You know, it's not going to fix them. I have a cochlear. And to be honest, I rarely wear it. Like when we come here and we set up and we're going to, I might use it for an event like this, but when I get home, I'll take it off. But I think it's important to let the families know that and don't force the child to wear a cochlear all day. It is exhausting. But also, you do need your deaf time. I like to call it deaf time. Just being deaf and just being a normal individual. So nowadays, you see babies being implanted with cochlear implants, and they've got that then all the time. I really feel sorry for them. And if I can just add to this, it's very important for the deaf child to have a deaf role model, somebody, a deaf adult that they can look up to, and they go, oh, look at you. You can achieve all of these things. You can live a life in the community so well. Because if a deaf child doesn't have access to that, they'll feel very lost in the world. So I think it's so important for them to have a deaf adult role model they can look up to.
Wow, wonderful. Slido has given us a question. Let me just add a little bit from my own perspective. My mum once said to me, if cochlears were available, you would have been implanted as a tiny little baby. I would have done it, Alastair. And goodness me, the impact that had on me. So, you know, one of those sliding door moments that I was like very grateful that there wasn't. You know, my mum is wonderful. She was the greatest advocate. I appreciate everything my parents did for me at the time, in the environment, with the knowledge available. But and it really reflects on my very strong attitude that parents always do the best they can. Now, I'd like to ask the audience, if you've got any questions, get those ready. We've got quite a few coming through on Slido. From Katrina, Dion, Rodney, you both talked about your identity changing through different phases of your life. What advice do you have for young people as they transition through different identities? Rodney, would you like to talk about that? The English word they've used is transition, but really the question is to both of you.
Well, I would just say that through that time of transition, you know, I would say it is a difficult time when you're transitioning emotionally, psychologically, just even dealing with the actual process of the transition. But I think it's important to always ask for help. Approach somebody that you trust, that you can talk to, and speak about that process and what you're actually experiencing and going through. I think that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I guess when I think about transition, I think of fluidity, and I think of something, that isn't very fluid. I think that it can be a bit, you know, you're swayed one way and then the next. I think when I think of me in the phases of my life, I had, you know, building my deaf identity and then my Aboriginal identity. My journey hasn't just been straightforward, right? You can't just make a deaf person stagnant. You know, we can't just be fixed. It's important for us to be flexible and let them explore their own world in their own way, in their own time. I think it's really important to just allow deaf people to have that space. You can't push them. You know, we can encourage them to have their own journey. I think that's my advice for that question.
My deaf identity and my queer identity are the two big aha moments that I've had in my life, where I've walked into a space and went, oh, it's not just me. You know, Dion, you spoke about having peer support, and I can't tell you, in both of those great transitions in my life, that has been so powerful. And a question specifically for you. How can we get the University of New South Wales to encourage deaf creative art practice? I wonder if you've got any ideas or suggestions for us.
So do you mean here at this university? I'm not familiar with this university. I'm more familiar with the National Art School. So
I think deaf.
I think, though, that deaf would love to have some projects in the university.
Do you have ideas on how to encourage or establish?
Oh, well, to set it up. Oh, wow. I think you need to reach out to deaf people first. And that would be willing to help set up such a practice. I think that's the best way. Because if you reach out to deaf artists, such as myself, Sue Wright, Daniel McDonald, so there's quite a few deaf artists you could reach out to, and I'm sure they'd be very happy to help. If I can just add to that as well, some suggestions might be also to ask a deaf person to become like a consultant that you could facilitate with them. And it is best, I do agree with Ange, the best way is to approach the deaf community. Don't just set up something and say, well, this is for deaf people now, and they have got no ownership. So co-design that with the deaf community would be my suggestion. And also, I would suggest, and saying that I think you also important to encourage deaf awareness training for the staff that can hear.
Yeah, so perhaps you and I could do a tour, Ange, and we'll do a bit of deaf awareness training and influence. I wonder if we got any questions here in the audience. Rosalind, would you like to stand here at the front? Thanks, Ros. We can re-sign
I'll re-sign
for you.
I have two questions actually. We'll start with one and see how we go. They're quick. So I guess my first question, you're sharing your journeys through trauma and your parents finding out that you were deaf and the initial shock, straight to the medical doctor. You get your diagnosis that you're deaf and you focus on hearing aids or cochlear. But for some children, that might work. And for others, it might not. It might be worse, right? I respect that everyone's got their own preferences and decisions. But automatically, straight to the medical intervention, how can we sort of set up something, some education that the medical intervention way isn't the only way? They can reach out to the deaf community and see that there's a world out there, there's more options, and their child can be successful with Auslan. Auslan will help them and the English development too. We understand language proficiency with Auslan, but it will also help them with their English, right?
So who wants to start with a response for that? Let the linguists do it.
I'm not going to talk about universities versus universities, but I am part of Sydney University. So I was asked to teach a class about speech therapy to audiologists, to OTs. And I think now, looking back, some of the universities, they do realise that there is that old disability model where we look at people as less than, and that's not working, right? We need to focus on who we are and representation. It's a process of time. Change takes time. Educating people for the future graduates so that they are deaf aware and their minds are open to the different avenues.
Now, I do have to keep time, so I wonder, could I just get one of you to respond?
Well, I believe that we do have the medical model, and I think that's fine, but so long as we have somebody that's representing the deaf community as well, so we can have options given to the parents and give parents time to consider the different options and to weigh them up and see how they can work. They're not against each other, they can work together. You have to think of the child and what is going to help that child succeed the most in their life. And I agree with all the comments that have been made so far. I think parents, of course, they're worried about their children and their child having a disability or being deaf. And really, that shouldn't be an issue. They just treat them as one of their child, as a child. And it's not a taboo subject. It's not like we have to hide the child because they have disability or they're different or they're deaf, but just treat them as normal.
We grew up in a time where there were no deaf role models. You never saw a deaf person on a TV screen. Kids are seeing more and more, not enough, but certainly there has been some progresses. I am so sorry that we are running out of time, but before we close, there's a couple of things that I want to say. First of all, my goodness, thank you so much. You have been so willing to share some real personal experiences. So great for the deaf community to hear, but also for the wider community to understand. So thank you all for your willingness to be so open. Denise and Adam, Matt, I beg your pardon, and our interpreters, I just want to acknowledge, thank you all. Rhonda, Nicole and Brooke, thank you for being here and interpreting for us today. Thank you to our audience, both online and here in the room with us. We hope this has been an experience where you get to hear a different perspective or hear something that you go, me too. So the Festival of Diversity this week, thank you very much for being here.
I was going to say happy International Week of, National Week of Deaf People. Yes, you're right.
Sure
Yes.